Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And we begin today with the US-China technology war. Yesterday, Monday, the US Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, announced new restrictions targeting the sale of semiconductor manufacturing equipment and chips used in AI and advanced computing to China. The move intensifies the US crackdown on China's technology development, aiming to limit Beijing's ability to enhance infrastructure potentially tied to military use. The announcement comes as the Commerce Department prepares for leadership changes under President-elect Donald Trump's administration next year. Industry analysts said a months-long pause between the drafting of the rules and their release on yesterday, allowed Chinese entities to stock up on semiconductors and machines they knew were likely to be restricted. The measures add 140 entities to the Commerce Department's list, barring US firms from conducting business with them without special authorization. New controls include software tools for semiconductor protection, high-bandwidth memory chips used in AI, and investment firms reportedly linked to China's military. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo emphasized that these actions reflect the Biden-Harris administration's coordinated efforts with allies to hinder China's ability to develop advanced technologies that could threaten U.S. national security. Raimondo stated, quote, "No administration has been tougher in strategically addressing China's military modernization through export controls." End quote. Unsurprisingly, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning criticized the move, accusing the US of overreaching under the guise of national security and promising decisive action to protect the interests of Chinese companies. Of course, we've heard this rhetorical response from Beijing before. As we have anticipated here on China Update, the final version of the restrictions is less extensive than earlier drafts, which proposed targeting more entities and suppliers, including Huawei Technologies. Last week we quoted veteran China analyst Bill Bishop on these measures. It's worth examining what he said again here. Quote, "They are a big win for the semiconductor equipment manufacturers who were able to successfully argue that because the Biden administration failed to get the Dutch and Japanese governments on board with certain additional restrictions, that it would be unfair to just target US firms. I'm also hearing that they will still be able to sell to Huawei's network of fabs. So while the government will likely push hard on claims of tough on China, and there will be condemnations from China, in fact, they may turn out to be even weaker and more loophole-ridden than expected." End quote. This does appear to be the case. The question is then, as such a key national security objective, why? Well, one answer is lobbying. According to Open Secrets, a nonpartisan group that tracks campaign spending, Applied Materials, ASML, Lam Research, and KLA, four of the world's largest chip tool makers, collectively spent more than $4 million this year lobbying in the US, up from $1.1 million in 2019. Bishop sardonically observed today, quote, "And now watch who moves from the Department of Commerce to semiconductor industry and law and lobbying firms." End quote. Greg Allen, director of the Wadhwani AI Center at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, speaking to US-based Washington Post, expressed today, quote, "These controls are weaker than what the United States should have done. You can make a halfway logical argument that says, sell everything to China. Then you can make a reasonable argument, sell very little to China. But the worst thing you can do is dramatically signal your intention to cut off China's access to technology, but then have so many loopholes and such bungled implementation that you incur almost all of the costs of the policy with only a fraction of the benefits." End quote. The Washington Post piece, citing unnamed officials and analysts, writes that the sanctioned firms to be placed on the Commerce Department's entity list do not include some fabs that the administration was considering including, quote, "before it encountered pressure from allies and American industries." End quote. Among the excluded fabs is Changxin Memory Technologies Inc., which is one of China's largest memory chip makers and is seeking to develop AI memory chips, including for Huawei. Also excluded were several factories run by China's largest chipmaker, SMIC, that were built after SMIC was placed on the entity list by the Trump administration in 2020. Those fabs may continue to receive US technology that is not otherwise banned. The US agency also expanded existing controls on chipmaking gear, including products made by US firms at foreign facilities. but with carve-outs for key allies such as Japan and the Netherlands. That comes after months of negotiations between Washington, Tokyo and The Hague, during which Biden officials floated but ultimately did not pursue applying US controls to companies like Tokyo Electron Limited and ASML Holdings NV. The market appears to agree that these new US controls have done little to change the current state of affairs. Shares of semiconductor equipment companies, including US gear makers Lam Research Corp, Applied Materials, Inc., and KLA, rallied on Monday, yesterday, after the details of the chip curbs were published. ASML said in a statement that it does not see the new controls having, quote, any direct material impact, end quote, on its business in 2024. With the new Trump administration looking to be much more tougher on trade and technology with China, the situation in 2025 may be much different. We move now to elite politics in Beijing. There was no public announcement of a November Politburo meeting or study session. This is the first time the 24-man supreme decision-making body that Xi Jinping leads has failed to publicly convene since May 2023. Usually in November, there would be a monthly Politburo meeting near the end of the month to discuss economic work for 2025, just before the annual Central Economic Work Conference. Some analysts have taken this as a sign that the rumors may be correct that the Central Economic Work Conference may convene earlier than usual, reflecting a Beijing concerned on the state of the economy. Investors and analysts are waiting to see what will come out of the conference, which typically outlines the broader economic policy agenda for the following calendar year. Investors who remember last year's conference might temper their expectations, however. That event, held from December 11th through 12th, amounted to a letdown for those seeking signs of greater stimulus, with top leaders instead pledging to make industrial policy the main economic priority. Xi Jinping also publicly skipped attending half of the key annual economic meeting for the first time, according to public records. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping spoke at the 4th Symposium on Belt and Road construction work in recent days. In his speech, the General Secretary expressed, quote, in recent years, the world has entered a new period of turbulent changes, with rising unilateralism and protectionism, and frequent regional conflicts and instability. Against this backdrop, promoting a high-quality development of the Belt and Road Initiative requires properly addressing various risks and challenges, effectively overcoming the impact of geopolitical conflicts, correctly handling the relationship between enhancing participating countries' sense of gain and maintaining China's interests, and effectively safeguarding China's overseas interests. End quote. We can see by this statement that Beijing is increasingly aware of the many risks and costs that have been associated with its very ambitious flagship foreign policy agenda. However, the language also suggests that Beijing very much plans to double down on the Belt and Road Initiative and its goals, with of course all the relevant geopolitical implications. Next up, we have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, as always, I have a huge favor to ask, that is just to hit the like button, and if you have not done so already, subscribe. This is a tremendous help for the channel and for the algorithm, and it allows the channel to grow. Sharing this with someone who you think would get some value from it is also a tremendous help, for which I am deeply appreciative. This channel is also primarily supported by you, subscribers, and if you'd like to go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable so it can be open and free 6 days a week for all, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, and finally for today, last week, US officials said that China had freed 3 American men in exchange for 2 imprisoned Chinese spies and at least 1 other Chinese citizen. 2 of the US citizens have been convicted on espionage charges. The third had been sentenced to death for a drug offense, which was later commuted to life in prison. As part of the prisoner exchange, too, the US agreed to downgrade its travel advisory for the People's Republic of China. The travel advisory for China is now at level 2. Exercise increased caution, the same level as for France and Germany. The alert had been level 3, the second highest level, advising Americans to reconsider travel to China partly because of, quote, the risk of wrongful detentions. End quote. Nicholas Burns, the US ambassador to China, had defended the Level 3 advisory in an interview last month, saying, quote, the government of China protests against the travel advisory, but they have no grounds to do so when we have such a major problem on the ground here. End quote. According to the Duihua Foundation, a prisoner rights group, about 200 Americans are currently detained in China, more than in any other foreign country. The travel advisory arguably has had a chilling effect on travel. Fewer than 1,000 Americans are estimated to be studying in China, compared with a peak of about 15,000 a decade ago, and an estimated 300,000 Chinese students currently in the United States. Yesterday, it was also reported by the US-based New York Times that as part of the deal, China also quietly agreed to allow the 73-year-old mother of Uyghur activist Nuri Turkel and 2 other Uyghurs, one an American citizen, to leave the country for the United States. The Biden administration had not made public the part of the deal involving the Uyghurs. China had barred the 73-year-old mother from leaving the country because her eldest son was involved in advocacy for Uyghur rights outside the country. Turkel, 54, is a former US official and senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Turkel had been born in a re-education camp in Kashgar in 1970. He came to the United States as a graduate student in 1995 and was later granted asylum. Speaking to the New York Times on Sunday, the mother, Ms. Mahmoud, expressed, quote, "Waking up in America and seeing my family, especially my grandchildren, is nothing short of a dream come true." End quote. Meanwhile, last Thursday, the Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry said that 3 Chinese citizens, quote, "who were wrongfully detained in the US," end quote, had safely returned to China. Adding, quote, "This once again proves that China will not abandon its compatriots at any time," end quote. So, who were these wrongfully detained Chinese? Well, the PRC Foreign Ministry has not identified the Chinese citizens involved, but on Wednesday, a US federal prisons database showed that Xu Yanjun, a Chinese intelligence officer serving a 20-year sentence, and Ji Chaoqun, a man Xu had worked with, were no longer in US custody. The third, one Jin Shanlin, is a former student convicted of possessing child pornography. Jin pleaded guilty in 2021 to possessing the child pornography. The question then arises, why did Beijing wish to engage in a prisoner swap for Jin? Well, during his trial in Texas, an FBI special agent testified that his family was, quote, "connected to influential members of the Communist Party in China," end quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.